911. What is your emergency?
My daughter, my 7-year-old daughter. She fell down the stairs. She's not breathing. Please, you have to hurry.
When the paramedics arrived at 1412 Sycamore Lane, everything seemed normal. The living room was clean. Framed family photos lined the hallway. But when they entered the little girl's bedroom, something felt wrong. The room was flawless. Toys were arranged on the shelves with military precision. The bed was made without a single wrinkle. A 20-year veteran of the police force, first on the scene, turned to his partner and whispered just 4 words. "This is not a room." He paused, then added, "This is a showcase." Behind the glass of that showcase was the story of 7-year-old Leo. Leo was the kind of boy who made superhero capes out of pillowcases, who hid pressed autumn leaves between the pages of his books, and who believed that thunder was the sound of angels bowling in the clouds. Tonight, I will tell you his story. I will tell you about his silent screams and the invisible maps he drew on the walls of that perfect room. Before we continue, a warning. This story involves the abuse of a child. I will not use graphic detail, but I will use the truth, and the truth itself is heavy. If you find you need to step away, please do so. If the silence from a neighbor's house has ever felt louder and more frightening than any noise, you are in the right place tonight. And I ask you, please, write the time of day you are hearing this in the comments below. Your feedback helps this story reach more people when they need to hear it most. Leo's life did not begin in silence. It began with laughter in a sunlit park with his father, Mark. It began with the smell of crayons and the proud display of a drawing on the refrigerator door. No nightmare ever starts at midnight. It begins in the light of day with a smile that feels almost real. Mark was a good father, but he was a tired one. After losing his wife to a sudden illness 2 years prior, he was both mother and father to a boy who held all the light in his world. He worked long hours at a construction firm, coming home with hands calloused and a mind exhausted, trying to build a future while holding on to the pieces of his past. The house was lived in, a comfortable chaos of toys on the floor and dishes sometimes left in the sink. It was a home filled with love, but also with a quiet ache of absence. Then Isabella arrived. She entered Mark's life like an answer to a prayer he hadn't realized he was whispering. She was intelligent, poised, and organized. She saw the chaos in Mark's home not as a mess, but as a project. She cooked meals that filled the house with warm smells. She sorted the laundry. She learned Leo's favorite dinosaur was the Stegosaurus, and bought him a book about them on their second date. To the outside world, she was perfect. Her social media was a carefully curated gallery of a new family blossoming. Photos of the 3 of them at a pumpkin patch, captioned "My 2 favorite guys." A smiling selfie with Leo with the hashtag #StepmomLife. She wrote long posts about the challenges and joys of being a bonus mom, and her friends and family flooded the comments with praise. "Leo is so lucky to have you," they wrote. Mark finally found his happiness. The house began to change. The comfortable chaos was replaced by immaculate order. Isabella had a rule for everything. Shoes off at the door. Coasters under every glass. Toys put away in their designated bins the moment they were done being played with. At first, Mark was relieved. He saw it as structure, as stability. He saw his home being transformed into the perfect family picture he'd always wanted. The neighbors on Sycamore Lane would see them in the front yard, Isabella weeding the flower beds while Mark mowed the lawn, and they would nod in approval. "He found a good one," they'd say. "That little boy finally has a mother figure." But beneath the polished surface, the first cracks began to appear. They were so small, you could easily miss them. It started with Leo's mistakes. A spilled glass of juice at dinner was not met with a simple, "It's okay." Accidents happen. It was met with a long, heavy silence from Isabella, followed by Leo having to sit at the table for an hour after everyone else had left, staring at the clean spot on the floor. That one afternoon, Leo came home from the park with a grass stain on his new jeans. The punishment was that he was not allowed to leave his room for the rest of the day. When Mark questioned it, Isabella's explanation was smooth and reasonable. He needs to learn to respect his things, Mark. We want to raise him to be a responsible young man, don't we? She framed every punishment as a lesson. She called it discipline. She told Mark he was too soft on Leo because of what happened to his mother. She used his grief as a tool to gain his trust. And Mark, exhausted and wanting to believe in this perfect new life, allowed it. He saw the strict rules not as control, but as care. He saw the spotless house not as a sterile environment, but as a symbol of their new, perfect family. He didn't realize that in a house where nothing can ever be out of place, a child himself can become the one thing that doesn't fit. The transformation of Leo happened slowly, quietly, behind closed doors. At school, he had always been a bright, energetic child. But now, his second-grade teacher, a woman named Anya Sharma, began to notice a change. The boy who used to raise his hand for every question now sat silently in the back of the classroom. The boy who loved recess now spent it walking the perimeter of the playground alone. His head down, Mrs. Sharma kept a journal of her students' progress. For Leo, the entries started to become concerning. October 5th. Leo seemed tired today. Didn't eat his lunch. Sighed he wasn't hungry. October 19th. Leo has a bruise on his arm. When I asked, he said he fell off his bike, but he couldn't tell me where or when. He pulled his sleeve down immediately. November 2nd. Parent-teacher conferences. I spoke with his father and stepmother. Isabella did all the talking. She said Leo is just going through a sensitive phase, still missing his mother. She was so articulate, so convincing. The biggest warning sign was in his artwork. Leo used to draw vibrant pictures filled with color. Yellow suns, blue skies, green trees. Now his drawings were dark. He drew pictures of his house, but all the windows had bars on them. He drew family portraits where his own figure was tiny, faded, standing far away from the other two. In one drawing, he drew himself inside a small box in the corner of the page, while a large, shadowy figure stood over it. When Mrs. Sharma asked him about the drawing, Leo just shrugged and put his crayons away. Mrs. Sharma called home 3 times over the next 2 months. Each time, Isabella answered. Each time, she had a plausible explanation. Leo has a stomach bug. Leo is having trouble making friends. Leo is acting out for attention. She would thank Mrs. Sharma for her concern, assuring her that they had it handled at home. The calls were never put through to Mark. Isabella would later tell him, Leo's teacher called again, but don't worry, I took care of it. No need to bother you with it at work. The silent clues multiplied. At the school's winter festival, Leo arrived in a thin t-shirt, shivering in the cold. When Mrs. Sharma offered him a spare sweater from the Lost and Found, Leo shook his head and said, I'm not allowed. He wouldn't elaborate. On a hot day in early spring, he refused to take off his thick, long-sleeved sweatshirt during gym class. Another teacher had to insist, and when Leo finally pulled it off, there were faded, yellow-green bruises dotting his upper arms. The report was filed with the school counselor, who scheduled a home visit. When the social worker arrived, Isabella greeted her at the door with a bright smile and a plate of homemade cookies. The house was spotless. Leo was brought out, dressed in clean clothes, and quietly answered the questions asked of him. He said he was clumsy. He said he loved his new mom. The social worker saw a clean home, a polite child, and a concerned stepmother. The case was noted as unfounded, with a recommendation to follow up if new concerns arose. Mark was caught in a web of manipulation he couldn't see. He was working more than ever, taking on extra shifts that Isabella encouraged, telling him it was for their family's future. When he was home, he was tired. He saw the surface, and the surface was perfect. The house was clean, dinner was on the table, and Isabella managed everything. He missed the small things. He didn't see that Leo no longer asked for bedtime stories. He didn't notice that Leo flinched whenever someone reached for him too quickly. He didn't question why Leo was no longer invited to birthday parties. Isabella had an answer for that too. "Oh, Leo's a bit of a homebody, aren't you, sweetie? He prefers to stay here with us." She was building a wall around the boy, brick by brick, and she was using Mark's trust as the mortar. The neighbors noticed the silence too. The elderly woman next door, Mrs. Gable, used to enjoy the sound of Leo playing in his backyard. The laughter had stopped months ago. She hadn't seen him outside at all. One night, she was woken by a strange, rhythmic thumping sound coming from the house. It wasn't loud, just a persistent, muffled beat. She told herself it was probably the washing machine, an unbalanced load. It happened again a week later. She considered walking over, knocking on the door, but she stopped herself. It was late. It wasn't her business. People have a right to their privacy. She went back to bed, but the silence that followed the thumping was more unsettling than the noise itself. The day it ended was a Tuesday. It had rained that morning, and the ground was soft and muddy. Leo had been sent to get the mail. On his way back inside, he forgot the first and most important rule of the house: shoes off at the door. He took 3 small steps onto the pristine, cream-colored hallway rug, leaving 3 small, muddy footprints. That was the trigger. For Isabella, those 3 muddy footprints were not a child's mistake. They were an act of defiance, a deliberate tainting of the perfect world she had constructed and controlled. We don't know the exact sequence of events that followed. The story was pieced together later from forensic evidence and a confession that came only after the lies fell apart. But we know it was not quick. We know the rage was not a sudden explosion, but a cold, methodical punishment that lasted for hours. At 9:42 p.m., the 911 call was made. The story of a fall down the stairs. A tragic accident. When paramedics and police entered the home, the scene was eerily calm. Isabella was distraught, but her story was rehearsed. Mark was in a state of genuine shock, a man whose world had just shattered. The hallway rug was clean. There was no sign of a struggle. Everything was in its place. They were directed upstairs to Leo's room. And that is where the flawless order became horrifying. The room was a museum exhibit of what a child's room should be. The Star Wars Lego sets were fully built, lining a high shelf untouched. The books were organized by color. The bed was perfectly made. It was the room of a child who was not allowed to be a child. As the paramedics worked on Leo's small, still body on the floor, a detective named Miles Corbin did a slow walk around the room. His gut told him this wasn't an accident scene. Accident scenes are messy. They are chaotic. This was sterile. He noticed the closet door had a hook and eye latch on the outside. He saw that the window was painted shut. His eyes landed on a large plastic toy bin in the corner. It was filled with stuffed animals, all neatly arranged. Acting on a hunch that he wouldn't be able to explain until later, Detective Corbin began to carefully remove them. Underneath the teddy bears and floppy-eared dogs, he found it. A simple, spiral-bound notebook. It wasn't a school notebook. It was a drawing pad. He opened it. The first few pages were filled with the drawings Mrs. Sharma had seen. Houses with bars on the windows. Small figures in boxes. But as he turned the pages, the images grew more direct, more desperate. He saw drawings of a child being locked in a dark closet. A drawing of a stick figure with tears streaming down its face, its stomach colored with an angry red scribble. The final drawing was the most chilling. It depicted a large, dark figure standing over a small figure lying at the bottom of a staircase. It was a child's simple, devastating confession. Detective Corbin flipped to the very last page of the notebook. There were no drawings. There was only one sentence, written in the shaky, labored handwriting of a 7-year-old trying to master a pencil. It said, "I am a bad boy." Leo was pronounced dead at the hospital. The story of a fall down the stairs began to unravel almost immediately. The emergency room doctor took one look at Leo's body and knew. The injuries were not consistent with a single fall. They spoke of something chronic, something repeated. The official autopsy report confirmed the doctor's worst fears. Leo had died from severe internal injuries and blunt force trauma. But the report detailed much more. It listed multiple bone fractures in various stages of healing, indicating a history of sustained abuse. There was evidence of malnutrition and dehydration. The child had been systematically broken down over a period of months, if not longer. His body was a roadmap of the torture he had endured in silence. In the interrogation room, Isabella was calm, collected. She repeated her story about the fall, word for word, over and over again. She was the grieving stepmother. She cried, but the detectives noted the tears never seemed to reach her eyes. They presented her with the autopsy report. She claimed Leo was a sickly child who bruised easily. Then they placed the notebook on the table. They opened it to the last page. When Isabella saw the drawing of the staircase, her composure finally cracked. For the first time, a flicker of panic crossed her face. Her story began to change, to shift. She blamed Leo. She said he was a difficult, manipulative child. She said he had behavioral problems. She said he drove her to it. Mark's interrogation was different. It was the story of a man waking up to a nightmare that had been his reality for over a year. He sat in a state of numb disbelief. He repeated, "She told me everything was fine." She said she was handling it. As the detectives laid out the evidence, the teacher's calls he never received, the school nurse's reports he never saw, the chilling details of the autopsy, his denial crumbled, replaced by a devastating, soul-crushing guilt. He had wanted a perfect family so badly that he failed to see the monster living inside his home, and he had failed to protect his own son. The trial was a painful reconstruction of Leo's last year. Mrs. Sharma took the stand, her voice breaking as she read from her journal and presented the dark drawings Leo had made in her class. The emergency room doctor and the medical examiner explained the science behind the pain, differentiating between old injuries and new ones, creating a timeline of suffering that was impossible to refute. Mrs. Gable, the neighbor, testified about the rhythmic thumping sounds, her testimony filled with regret that she had not done more. Isabella's social media posts were presented as evidence. The smiling photos and loving captions were displayed on a large screen in the courtroom, a grotesque contrast to the testimony being heard. Her carefully crafted image of the perfect bonus mom was exposed for what it was, a facade to hide an unspeakable evil. The jury took less than 4 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree. Isabella was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mark was also charged with felony child endangerment and criminal negligence. He pleaded no contest, his life sentence a private one, to be served every day for the rest of his life in a prison of his own regret. The verdict brought legal justice, but it couldn't bring back Leo. The community on Sycamore Lane was shaken. How could this have happened? How could they have missed it? The perfect house with the manicured lawn now stood as a monument to a collective failure. Leo's voice was silenced, but his drawings still speak. They speak for every child who who cannot find the words for their fear. They are a reminder that the most desperate calls for help are often silent. A sudden change in a child's behavior, a retreat from the world, a darkness that appears in their art, an injury with a story that doesn't quite add up. These are not just phases. These are warning flares. You may feel that the system is broken. You may be afraid of being wrong, of interfering, of making things worse. But if a doubt is planted in your mind, that doubt could be the seed of a child's rescue. One phone call, one email to a teacher, one knock on a door. It could be the one voice a child needs to hear, telling them, "I see you." A crime scene investigator, years after the trial, was asked about the Leo case. He said, "The most disturbing crime scenes aren't always the bloodiest. They're the quietest. The ones where you can feel a soul was slowly erased, and nobody noticed until it was too late." Tonight, if you hear the silence, listen to it. Listen for Leo, and for all the other Leos whose names we will never know. Make that silence your loudest alarm. Because a child's life is a sacred trust, and the duty to protect it belongs to all of us. We are all neighbors on Sycamore Lane.